Hello and welcome back to Lost in Sci-Fi and Fantasy. I'm your host Leo, and this week we are talking the second book in the Mead Mishaps series, That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf. Yes, these titles are quite long, but that's what kind of attracted me to this series, is that it's a silly, long-titled thing. So, you might be wondering, why am I doing this so soon? It's technically only been about 4 episodes since the last time. But it has technically been almost 2 months. But I took that break in May, so I had a lot of episodes that technically could have ended up in between, but didn't. And so, yeah, we're kind of still dealing with the aftermath of that. There were 2 books that I attempted to read in that time that I just kind of stopped. The first being The Girl Who Can Throw Shit With Her Mind, I believe it's called, which concept seemed fine, but the length of the book was a bit daunting. I know I read Dune, but when the first few pages give you the feeling that the main character is just kind of an asshole, it kind of grates on you a little bit, so I decided to set that aside, and I'll try tackling it again sometime in the future. In the far-ish future from right now. But, yeah, I'll see later. There's a lot of issues I had with it besides that. Like, it has multiple perspectives, even though you would think that a book called The Girl Who Could Throw Shit With Her Mind would focus on the girl who threw shit with her mind. But, I'm not against multiple perspectives. In fact, this book that we're talking about today has multiple perspectives and is a bit of a thing. But yeah, so the second book I attempted to try to read was The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared. I enjoyed the movie that came out many years ago now. It's weird thinking back just how long it's been since that movie came out. But yes, so I wanted to read the book, and so far, I read almost half the damn thing, but it was starting to get on my nerves, the fact that it decided to kind of switch how it was doing things. They decided to have, the modern stuff at the beginning be boring, but kind of drawn out, to where you're looking forward to the relatively fast-paced, his history going up. Then, as the book goes, it switches, and then the history sections start covering smaller and smaller periods of time, and start taking up more and more of the book, which gets really dull. Especially a lot of the subject that they're talking about, it's just kind of boring. But anywho, so I decided to just kind of give up on that for the time being and set it aside, especially since I'm also kind of worried about the sequel, which is supposed to be The Further Adventures of the 100-Year-Old Man, but technically based off of time periods, he'd be closer to 116, something like that. No, he'd be 111, something like that. The book is set in 2018, where the first book is set in 2005, and it involves, because I compared The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out a Window and Disappeared to be like the Swedish Forrest Gump, essentially. And because he goes around and influences a lot of major historical events and whatnot, except for with Forrest Gump, he's still kind of young, and we follow a lot of his story as he goes along, where with the 100-Year-Old Man, we're seeing not only his current really old self actually doing stuff, but then we look back on his past and see what he got up to. But yeah, so it's like Swedish Forrest Gump, and the sequel is, well, what if that, but modern times? So there's Trump and Kim Jong-un and whatnot, and it's very awkward because Alan Clarkson, the character, the 100-Year-Old Man, is written to be very apolitical, so he just kind of goes around and if he feels that something's dumb, he'll point out that he thinks it's stupid, but for the most part, his whole thing is that he doesn't want to get involved. So he's trying to stay, away from the politics of everything. So it's a bit weird. But anywho, so yeah, I decided to stop reading that book. And because of the fact that I was curious about the format change of the Mead mishaps and whatnot, and just to see how the story continued, I decided to go ahead and hop into That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf. So what I mean by that there's a format change is, as I stated before, now we are following multiple perspectives. Not that many. It's... They do it in a weird way. See, initially what I thought they were going to do is they were going to try to divide the time up evenly between the male lead and the female lead, but they didn't. Felix, the titular werewolf, only gets 3 chapters dedicated to his perspective, while Bree takes up the majority with special guest appearance by Cinnamon near the end of the book, and then the epilogue's perspective is from that of Dante, the storm dragon from the first book, who joined the pirate crew and whatnot, and he is the male lead of the third book. So it is kind of trying to set up the third book and whatnot there. So that's okay, but Cinnamon's perspective is slightly pointless, as it is literally 1 chapter, and it's just her kind of standing around, giving a slight perspective on their attack on the final thing. But we'll get to that in a bit, because it does come near the end of the book. So this book is set about a year, well, a few months, give or take, after the end of the last book. It states that Cinnamon's journey in the last book was over the course of about a year. She was gone for about a year, so the many weeks it took to get to the end point of the last book, and then her months hidden away on an island, eventually lead to it being about a year. And then they've been back for a few months, which brings into question some things about this book, but I guess it kind of works in the book's favor a little bit, because the whole book, well, one, it does have a content warning similar to the last one, though it's more mild. This time it says, content warning, please be aware, this book contains graphic violence, kidnapping, dubcon or dubious consent, in brackets, love potion, light BDSM, and sexually explicit content that could trigger certain audiences. Now, this book does kind of, get going pretty fast. The story kicks off with Bree and friends enjoying some drinks as festivities have kicked off for the return of the heroes, even though, their whole mission was a sham and the goddess that they were serving was fake and has been killed. The town loves a good festivity, so they decided to party it up anyway. We do learn, because one of the questions I had at the end of the previous book was like, what happened to the hero party? We still technically don't know the fates, quote unquote, of the rest of them. We just know, we know Priscilla's fate. She is dating the centaur lady from the first book, and we know one guy straight up was killed in the last book, so we don't have to worry about him. But the other two, questionable. We have no clue what happened to them. We don't even get a single fucking mention of them. Nothing at all. So who knows? As for Cinnamon, she's come back. She is living with Fallon and whatnot. Everything's going pretty good. She has a bit of a more outgoing personality than she had when she left, so things have changed a bit there. But overall, things are pretty okay. People were a little bit apprehensive. In fact, there's still a lot of people being dicks about the whole demons thing, but for the most part, people are adjusting to demons being around. Yeah, so Bree is chilling, drinking, eating cheese. Well, is she eating cheese? No, she's drinking. But she's getting harassed by a local guy, I think it's like one of her neighbors, who shares like a neighboring plot of land to her, who's been trying to get her to marry him so that he can, consolidate assets, etc. She refuses, and he kind of goes off to get her a drink. And when he returns, he's trying to push this drink on her, but she doesn't want it. And she takes it, throws it, he dodges, and ends up hitting Felix, the male lead for this book. That's when they find out that what she threw was a love potion. He comes up to her and gets all cuddly and whatnot. Now, the book spends a good amount of time at the beginning here establishing that Bree, for the most part, has trouble forming relationships. She tends to be a lot more introverted. She loves romance novels and she would like something like that to happen to her. She doesn't think it will. Part of it is because she feels she doesn't deserve it for some reason or another. But for the most part, she tries to keep a distance and, not really get into any relationships. She's also very not into like personal touch or anything like that. She has her bubble and she wants people to stick to it, kind of thing. Now, that almost immediately crumbles as when Felix gets very cuddly, she states that she's fine with it. She just kind of goes with it. And yeah, we go into this thing of while she's trying to figure out ways to potentially help him and get the love potion off. The instructions on the bottle that they read state that the potion needs to be reapplied every 2 weeks. So they just have to wait 2 weeks and the potion will subside. But Felix, at the very least, believes that she is his fated mate. So the werewolves have a thing where they have, love at first sight. The imprinting as well is what he goes through. So when he sees Bree, he immediately imprints, and there's that. Which brings into the question, how long has Cinnamon been back, and how long has the crew been there? The assumption is that they've probably been there at least a little bit. It gets confusing because they're having the festival for the return of the heroes, which would mean that they probably just returned. But then there's the question of when how long have they actually been there? Because they make it seem like they've been there for a little while, but I don't know. Let's just assume that the heroes just returned, because that's kind of the only way that Felix wouldn't have met Bree, because it's stated that Felix is Cinnamon's demon best friend. So if that was the case and they had been there for months, then she would have been introduced to Felix at some point during that time, right? So we'll have to assume that they had just got back, and this is the first time Felix is seeing Bree. That's the only way it'll really work. But yeah, so the problem is, because of the fact that he looked at her while technically under the influence of the love potion, the big question is this real? Does he actually love her? And was it an actual fated mate imprinting situation? Or is the love potion just making him think that he has had that happen? Now, we get the explanation from him that he can feel the influence of the love potion, but he has a much stronger desire above that, which would be the imprinting. So yeah, that's the little bit of insight that we get from his perspective. Yeah, so something I would have kind of liked, though it technically can't have worked based off of how it ended up in the end, would have been if the love potion had to be ingested. I think that would have been a little bit better. And maybe they just missed something on the bottle. I don't know. It would have been funner for me, I think, if the love potion just the whole misunderstanding is the fact that he was hit with the love potion at the same time. But it would have been fun if the love potion actually wasn't affecting him at all. It's just that because of the fact that the two events happened at the same time, that everything's thrown into question. But, yeah. Anywho, so, yes, a lot of things happen that are kind of sitcom-y things as they're trying to figure out what's going on. So, yeah. The overall plot for this book is a lot smaller than the previous book. The previous book being that they have to go destroy the goddess, the false goddess, who's actually a necromancer and whatnot. This book, it's more... Well, you don't even learn what the actual, underlying thing is until, the last quarter of the book. And this book is short. It's only 244 pages. And you don't learn, the big issue. You get hints about, what's going on as, women start disappearing. And that's, the big kind of motivator for their relationship, kind of. As Felix starts going into a panic attack. Because what ends up happening is, while she's trying to do research on how to undo the love potion, because there's a whole situation where after she gets drunk and throws the love potion, she just kind of goes home to sleep it off so that they can figure out what they're going to do about it the next day. But on her way home, she gets attacked by a ghoul and is saved by Felix in his werewolf form, because she didn't actually at that point know what his form was until that. But she ends up passed out. He takes her home, and there's some awkward, that's kind of creepy, but also not the worst thing, as he had to break in her door because he didn't have a key or anything. So he broke in her door and promises to fix it, to put her to bed, and then he just kind of hung around, and he eventually he left, but then came back, looked around her house, and then went and did errands and whatnot. Then when she woke up, he explained this stuff to her, and yeah, then they have a whole discussion of what they want to do, and she states that while she would like something to potentially happen, she doesn't want to do anything until after the love potion is worn off, so that she can fully know that everything's real, because she doesn't want to try to get into a relationship just for it to immediately dissolve 2 weeks later. That kind of thing. So there's that. And also she feels like she would be taking advantage of him if she were to act upon anything whilst he was under the influence of the love potion. So yes, he decides to leave because he needs to get distance from her, because, being close is kind of driving him a bit mad. So he goes, and through some events, he comes to learn that women are being kidnapped. And this is when he panics, and he rushes off and does some things. This is around the time that it jumps back to Bree's perspective, as she's gone to get the potential cure, the book of cures for what could potentially maybe get rid of the love potion. So with that, she goes home, and on her way home, she comes across some things have changed around her house. First, the nameplate outside of her house has been replaced with a new one with the last name, I think it's Monet? Or it might be pronounced Monette. I don't know if it's pronounced the same as the artist or not. Then she goes and finds Felix in her house and learns that he got them married. So what happened is the description of who had been taken was, unmarried, single women had been kidnapped. So he figured that as a way to protect her from potentially being kidnapped, he would get them married so that she would be quote-unquote taken, and thus the ghouls wouldn't attack her, was his theory, I guess. And she's initially kind of upset about it, but is able to move on, as she's ready to move on to the cures. Now, the potential cures, she says, they'll try the cures, but then plan B is in order to at least try to alleviate the symptoms, because the big worry around the love potion and the imprinting is that everything is being amplified for him to the like nth degree right now, and could potentially lead to him having like a heart attack, because the effects of just the general imprinting are being amplified by the love potion, causing like the yearning and stress to be like tenfold, to where he could end up having a heart attack. So yes, alleviate the symptoms through sex. But first, she tries the 3 potential cures that could potentially save him, which was like a herb mixture that failed, that did nothing. Of course, when she asks him like how he feels, he just says, pretty much that he's still in love with her. He doesn't say whether or not the potion is gone. He just says that he's still feeling the same that he was. But yeah, which wouldn't have given her much information. He was still under the effects of the love potion, but still. Then it was a chant, and then it was a dance and a chant, which ended up... Now, this part is very confusing. I think it's that, like, she accidentally botched it or something, but she ends up summoning tentacles that he has control over for some reason. I have no clue why. It is not really explained how the dance/chant ended up with tentacles that he could control. But this is at the point where she acquiesces. She gives in and says that they are to try Plan B. And that is partially because the situation that she found herself in, because when the tentacles spawn, she ends up strung up by said tentacles. This book gets weird with its sex scenes, just so you know. At least it gets weird with this sex scene, where it's tentacle BDSM. Very weird. And yeah. So, we'll skip over most of the details. But yeah, he's able to control the tentacles. She says that she's giving up because, they've tried everything else. This was Plan B. And also, this scenario matches some of the fantasies she's had because of the books she reads. She reads a lot of romance novels, specifically to do with shifter characters. Now, something that confused me is something that she was looking forward to at the beginning of the book was that now that demons and humans and whatnot could have these relationships, she was looking forward to see what books would come out of it. But the problem is, most of the books that she was reading were already about that. So, anywho. So, they do the deed, and then supposedly they had like at least 2 to 3 more rounds afterwards, but the author decided to skip that because it probably would have ended up being 50 pages long of just pure sex scenes. Not that some people would complain. So, after that, Bree decides to go get counsel from Cinnamon, as, that's her closest friend to, one, have the same experience, or at least similar experiences to her, and also she's close by. Otherwise, she was going to go see her friend Kitty, who is Cinnamon's cousin. But she goes to Cinnamon and talks. They dish and whatnot. And eventually she learns that one of the people that was actually taken was Kitty. And that they're planning a manhunt, essentially. What is it? A search party. That's it. They're planning a search party to go out and search for the missing women. But that almost gets immediately canceled, as when Bree is on her way back to her house, she gets attacked by a ghoul. Felix attacks the ghoul, kills it, and Bree is now slightly afraid of Felix because scary werewolf. She's scared of his wolf form, but still likes the guy behind the wolf form, and is just worried about the potential of, because basically Fallon, the dragon from the first book, he kind of scared her with a creation myth that happened that had to do with a werewolf, where he fell in love with a dragon's wife and fell under the influence of like a love potion, and it drove him mad to where he ended up killing her. So she's scared of that potentially happening. But he tries to reassure her, and he got a crystal from the ghoul. They go back to Cinnamon and Fallon is very upset. He is very tired, and starts going to like decrypt the gem to find the location of these women. So the manhunt, or the search party's called off, and a curfew's kind of put in place while he tries to decrypt the thing. Then they go back home. He sleeps on the couch. She goes up to bed, but ends up coming down eventually, and they cuddle for a bit. Then they, I think at this point, decide to go on a date where they go on a picnic / boat ride thing. It's basically, early on, Felix had like this dream of what he would like the perfect date he would take her on, and it was like floating down the river and then going on a picnic. And this is where they learn a little bit more about each other, about the fact that in Volstagg, where he was living before the curse was lifted, they had long periods of time of just eternal darkness. So they just lived in the dark for huge swaths of the year, because it's like at the North Pole-ish area on the map. But, you know, they just learn a bit more about each other. They end up having sex, and he gets a little too into it and goes to bite her. And he bites her, not enough to like break skin or anything, before he's able to regain control. And he apologizes because he was like a hair's width away from turning her. As that is kind of what... Well, the big worry is that the love potion imprinting mix will kill him because it'll put too much strain on him. The big issue that he's fighting against is that the mixture of the imprint and whatnot is giving him a massive desire to claim her. And in order to do this, the idea is... Because I think part of it is because in his mind it would fully reassure her and him that this is real. Because the idea is that if he turns her into a werewolf, she will immediately imprint upon him as well, and thus both of their worries would be assuaged and everything would be okay. But he does not want to do it without her permission. And after he explains what he almost did, she, shows she's actually not super upset. She, of course, would have liked, to potentially give permission and whatnot. And she says, ask me again, after the 2 weeks are up, and I might say yes to being turned. She's, not against the idea of being turned into a werewolf. The only thing that she doesn't want is, she asks him some questions about what would happen. And she's like, I'm not going to turn into a crazed idiot every full moon, am I? And he's like, no, maybe the first time, but otherwise, no. You'll get used to it and be able to kind of shift on command kind of thing. And yeah, she's like, yeah, maybe after the 2 weeks are up and this is actually a thing, maybe. Then something weird happens as they start getting a bit frisky again. They start hearing a voice. Now this part from this point on, a lot of the book started confusing the hell out of me. As just random ass shit just starts happening. And what happens is an alligator, or what they first assume is a log, is floating by with what's first assumed to be just a metal rod, but is actually a sword sticking out of it. And the sword can talk. Presumably, based off of some of the phrases used in an Australian-ish accent. Because obviously this is a fantasy world. It's Australian-ish. Or Australian-esque accent. And yeah, its name is Ashley, I think? No, Alexis. The sword's name is Alexis. She was created by some group of idiots and then she was stolen by a bandit, and the bandit was helping cultists. That's the big thing. Like, that's when we learned that cultists are who are taking the women. They take the sword to Fallon because the sword knows where the women are being held, but the sword is being a bit bullheaded in telling them where the women are, as she wants to go to the beach and be surrounded by scantily clad men, which, I mean, the sword wants what the sword wants, I guess. But they're not taking that because they need to know now, so they use some forced interrogation methods or extreme interrogation methods to get the sword to talk. The sword gives up the name or the location of where it's happening, and then they're interrupted in their planning, because their plan now is to get Dante and take the pirate crew to go sneak up on the base and sneak in to free the women and take down the cult. But as they're planning, Kitty comes out of nowhere, is, a little bit rough, but overall okay, and Cinnamon tests by chucking a thing, because the cousins have a bit of a strained relationship. They're constantly arguing. They have like a rivalry thing happening. And so to test that she's not an illusion, she chucks like a small stone at her. Yeah, she's real. Then Bree goes over and hugs her, and then they're teleported away. Bree wakes up in like a dungeon thing with her arms tied by these like green glowing vines. And there's a ton of women around her also strung up by the green glowing vines. So, what's happening? The situation going on here is that this cult is sapping away the magical energy from these women. So, it's explained relatively early on that, demons have a lot of magic and they have access to magic and whatnot, some more than others. And humans also have access to magic. And they have like a reserve of magic, but they just don't have any way to really access it. There's some people that can try to access it, but for the most part, they just don't. So they have this untapped reserve. And what Maeva, the goddess from the previous book, was doing is she had these temples set up to draw that magic passively from like her subjects, was the idea. And that kept her powerful, and she didn't really have to do anything to get that power. What this cult is doing is they're trying to sap the magic away so that they can revive what they believe to be their god, which in this case takes the form of a giant lobster. So, anywho, Bree is able to get the sword, and because the sword teleported with her, and the cult just left it on her. In fact, the cult did zero, weapon management to, check that these women were, disarmed, so whatever. And the sword's just, at her feet. She works it up, is able to cut her binds, cut everyone else's binds, and everyone's free, and the ones that are still able to stand and move around start their plan to go and cut down the reserve of magic. So the idea, the reason that Kitty ended up teleporting them both back, is that the cult sent Kitty to go get Cinnamon, not knowing that Cinnamon would keep a healthy distance from her cousin. They expected her to do what Bree did and go and embrace her. And they were after Cinnamon, because Cinnamon is the wife of the dragon, Fallon, and he imbued her with magic, or I guess additional magic. And so they were wanting her to be able to speed up the process. And they were upset to find out that Bree was not Cinnamon. So, yes. They go, and they are, along the way, are able to find the antidote to the love potion, because it turns out this cult is the one that's distributing the love potion. Their whole goal the reason why they want their god to rise and become the new deity and whatnot is that basically it's a cult of incels. They felt that Maeva was a weak god and that men need to rule the world and whatnot. So the way that they're going to do it is they're going to go and have the god switch up the roles, make sure that women don't do anything more than become housewives and make children. So they go, and while they're trying to stop the cult, she goes to stab one of the little sack things that's storing the magic, and as she's going to do that, she ends up immediately ripped away and is in this weird mindscape talking to the god. So the god is this amorphous kind of Cthulhu-esque being that needs a host body in order to survive. This god deity thing, it had inhabited the body of Maeva as she had asked it to, in order to give her power and whatnot, because she was dying of a plague and decided to just kind of give up and go to the god and offer to host it. And that's how we get a little look in at the backstory of Maeva and whatnot, and the fact that basically she was being controlled by this thing. Well, basically this thing gave her the power, and she kind of went mad with power, essentially. And it now wants her as its host. Wants Bree as its host. As the cult that it's working with is highly incompetent. It isn't happy with them at all. And it's been just kind of hanging out in the body of a giant lobster because that's all it could do. And it's been having the cult feed it magic in order to stay within this realm. So as it's trying to search her memories for something to entice her, it comes across a scene from when Cherry was still around, Cinnamon's sister, and they were at a book fair in the near-ish by, I think it's capital-ish area for this area. And she's fighting fiercely to get this book, so it assumes that she wants knowledge. But when she shows it what the book was, it's kind of disgusted by it, essentially. And what it is, it's one of her romance novels. It's specifically to do with a Kraken shifter. And yeah, so it's kind of disgusted by it. Then she moves on to the sex scene that happens in it. And according to her, the sex scene happens in chapter 3, which this book, so yeah, things kind of move on kind of fast in that book. And she goes and shows some more things, including her having sex with Felix and whatnot. And eventually it kind of backs away a bit. And she's like, no, maybe you could actually help me. Maybe there is something that I could get out of this. And she's like, have you heard of the Omegaverse? And he's like, I don't want to know. And she starts going into the explanation, an in-depth explanation as to what the Omegaverse is, and could you make this happen? And she shows it images of the Omegaverse, supposedly in this universe at least, there's a version or a story that actually has picture aids in it, and yeah, she basically completely freaks out the ancient immortal being, and it's nope, I'm good. Yep. No, thank you. And it releases her. And she then cuts open the thing, and Alexis becomes imbued with magic. And she becomes technically, I guess in D&D terms, she becomes an animated sword, as she's now able to float around and act on her own. So she goes off and starts killing things. While Bree starts fighting with the cult leader, and as the cult leader has her pinned down and is choking her, Felix comes in wolf form, because the chapter that jumps over to Cinnamon is literally just is just they're holding back Felix as he got closer to where the cult is being holed up. He becomes more frantic and whatnot, so he starts rushing off, and they're holding him back, but they're not able to hold him for very long, and he just rushes off, and they go, well, I guess the stealth mission is over. Full attack. So, yeah, so he comes in, and he just starts ripping into the cult leader, and then he's, like, kind of crazed. She has the antidote, and she's, like, slowly bringing it out, and she's trying to get him to, like, allow her to give it to him, because she doesn't want to risk him, like, dodging it if she were to throw it at him. And then he kind of lunges at her and bites her in the arm. And then she's able to, while being bitten, get it splashed on him, and it immediately, like, the love potion part of it breaks, and he calms down, he releases, and then, you know, they clean up the situation. Then they take the giant lobster, and after they kill it, and they go cook it. They have a lobster bake. They make a lobster bisque. They make a lobster mac and cheese. They make a whole ton of stuff out of the lobster. They have a beach party and whatnot to appease the now flying magic talking sword. And then she goes to find Felix, goes to Dante, because he's usually bugging Dante. Felix, during one of Felix's POV chapters, he does go to Dante to get a birth control rune, because that's what Fallon had, and he figured, like, oh, you know, maybe dragons can give it to him, and Dante is able to give him the I think it's a rune of barrenness or something, basically no kids while rune in effect, but once rune is taken off, you're good to go. And it's supposedly a very painful thing, as, like, he jabs his finger, like, around his pelvis, I think, or, like, just above, like, somewhere around the stomach-ish area. Jabs his finger in, it's supposedly very painful, but the pain subsides and whatnot. That happened ages ago, before they first had sex. Because he has a whole thing where he wants a lot of kids. She doesn't really want all that many kids. So, and especially with the love potion and whatnot, don't want to get anywhere near that kind of stuff happening. So, magic birth control. Anywho, she goes to Dante. He's like, oh yeah, he asked for a thing about lifting curses. And she's confused at first, and he's like, I don't think it's for him, because, you know, they already got rid of the love potion. It's for you. As she is now likely to turn into a werewolf. So, she intends to go looking for him, but instead goes home, because she feels that the reason that he would want to get rid of the curse is because the love potion had influenced his state of mind, and she wasn't his fated mate. So she's kind of heartbroken. So she goes home, sees the sign, chucks it into the woods, and when she gets inside the house, she finds Felix there with the book and paperwork laid out. And she asks why he's still there, and he's like, well, I live here. And she's like, why do you want to get rid of it? And he's like, because I did it without your permission. I did it against your will. That's not right. She's like, well, she goes into explaining that she believes that, you know, the reason that he would want to break it is because she's not his fated mate. And he, again, reassures her that, no, it's just, like, you are my fated mate and whatnot. It's just that, you know, it's not with your permission. Now, we don't know whether or not he actually did reverse it or anything, because, like, he's like, oh, you know, we have a month and whatnot to get this sorted out before the next full moon, so, you know, we have time. But yeah, it's never explained if they actually do undo it. But she's very happy that, you know, she is his fated mate and whatnot, and they're happy. The epilogue follows Dante as he's trying to, you know, sleep, but he gets interrupted by Felix, who wants the rune taken off. Dante, after being bribed with pie and also having a bit of a discussion, with Felix, goes ahead and removes the rune, as we are now led to believe that, she probably now wants at least a kid with him, and maybe she is to be Werewolf. It's, again, not explained. Who knows? Maybe the next book will give us a hint as to what's happening in this situation, but I sadly doubt that, as the next book I know actually takes us away for a bit from Buhail. See, the next book is supposed to follow Dante on his journey to find his fated mate, or to find a mate. And, he was hoping that, it would be someone in the town, but so far that hasn't really happened. And Felix is like, yeah, you actually have to, like, talk to them, because they humans don't imprint or anything, so you have to, be nice and get to know them. So he decides to set out on his journey to find his mate. But yes, that time I got drunk and yeeted a love potion at a werewolf. Overall, I quite liked it. There was a handful of things that I was quite annoyed with, but overall wasn't too bad. I was annoyed with the fact that it took so long for, like, the main thing of the story to actually happen. But once it actually kicked in and was happening, it was good. Though there was that weird moment when, as she's going to stab the thing, it just immediately cuts to her, like, in a different situation altogether. It confused me for, like, a little bit. The mention of Omegaverse fucking almost killed me. It threw me so off guard when I read that. I was like, why? Why are you doing this to me? But, yes, overall, it's a fairly short, very fast read. I liked that it focused a little bit more on them getting to know each other a bit more. I mean, they do have sex quite early in the book. In this book, they decided to move quite a bit faster overall. Less of the sexual tension of the first book and more just sex, I guess. They do focus a little bit more on the, like, relationship side of things, like, more like what he could be doing outside of them, like that, them actually going on little dates, them getting to know each other, them doing farm work together. He's lactose intolerant, so that's a thing that we learn. In fact, it does say it on the back of the book, but yeah, it's pretty good. Overall, I do recommend it. I do recommend that you read the first book first, of course. I am excited for the third book, but I'm going to actually space it out a little bit more. There's going to be a few books that I'm going to read before I even read the book I plan on reading before it. So it's going to be a little while before I get to the third book, as I have some minor anxieties going into the third book as to narrative satisfaction. We'll see. But yeah, there is a fourth book that is supposed to be out in the UK, but when I Google it, it doesn't have a title. And its release date was in May, but it doesn't have a title. It does have a synopsis. It's supposed to follow Usha, the pirate captain, and her Lamia friend, her first mate, as they do a... what's it called? I don't think it has a specific name, but basically where it's like, my parents want to give me a arranged marriage, but wait, I already have a betrothed, is essentially what they're going with. But yeah. Yes. With that said, though, that's that. I was going to do Star Trek next week, but I have quite a few episodes still to cover. I am only on the 4th episode as of recording this, and I have so many more to watch. So I am delaying Star Trek by at least 1 week, maybe 2. We shall see. As I am kind of worried at how long it's going to take me. The first few episodes that I've been watching have been a struggle. Like, as it is, I'm only on episode 4, And most of the episodes I plan on covering have been taken up on what I plan on doing. So just to give you guys a little bit of a preview to tide you over until I do eventually actually record the full episode. The way I plan on covering the Star Trek series is by doing it in a best, worst, weirdest scenario, because there's too many episodes to cover it episode by episode. If I was going to cover episode by episode, I would do it as its own podcast, and I might someday, who knows. But one, I would want a co-host for that, and I don't have one lined up at the moment. But anywho, the idea is that normally it will be best, worst, weirdest. Simple. But since this is the very first season of the very first series of Star Trek, I figured I had to do a little bit more. So I decided to also cover the two pilots. So the two pilots are, of course, the very first episode, and then episode 4 is, I guess, is the re-airing of the second pilot, the one that actually sold the show, titled Where No Man Has Gone Before. So I will do those two as well, but I also already have the worst episode marked down, and I'm only 4 episodes in. I might end up changing my mind on the worst episode. I don't know, but yes, it's a situation for sure. With it being a 30 episode season, it's going to be exhausting to talk about. I would literally die if I had to recap all 30 episodes in one single episode. I would die. As it is, this episode on a 244-page book is, at least in recording time, approaching an hour. In edited time, it'll probably be about 53 to 55 minutes. Sorry, I'm tired. But yes. So Star Trek was going to be next week, but I'm going to delay it at least 1 to 2 weeks so that I can actually watch every episode of season 1. Because I do also want to at least have some highlight stuff that I can talk about. But yes, other than that, I think that's it. I don't currently know what I'll be talking about next week, but I'll get around to figuring that out soonish. With that said, thank you guys so much for watching / listening. If you guys liked this, feel free to give it a like, comment, subscribe if you are on YouTube, or rate, review, share it with your friends on any podcast catcher of your choice. Once again, thank you guys so much for listening. I will talk to you guys next week. Goodbye.